Welcome back to our channel, where we dive deep into the heart-stopping drama and intricate psychological webs of Genoa City. Today is a thrilling day to unpack the latest twists and turns that keep us all on the edge of our seats. Grab your favorite beverage, settle in, and let us explore the dark, twisting corridors of betrayal, memory, and revenge that are currently tearing our favorite characters apart. The landscape of Genoa City is currently trembling under the weight of a terrifying psychological thriller, with Phyllis Summers finding herself at the absolute epicenter of a nightmare she inadvertently created. For weeks, the brilliant and fiercely independent corporate powerhouse has been backed into a suffocating corner by Victor Newman and his ruthlessly fabricated artificial intelligence evidence. Facing the complete destruction of her legacy at the Summers conglomerate and the terrifying prospect of federal prison, Phyllis made a fateful, desperate calculation. She crossed a dangerous moral event horizon by capturing the amnesiac Matt Clark, intending to use him as the ultimate bargaining chip against the Newman family. However, this desperate gambit has spectacularly backfired, unleashing a chain of events that has now placed her very life in imminent, lethal jeopardy. To understand the sheer magnitude of the danger Phyllis now faces, one must look back at the suffocating environment of Matt Clark's recent captivity. Hidden away in a secret, heavily guarded room, Matt was stripped of his autonomy, his reality entirely dictated by Phyllis. She controlled who he saw, what he ate, and what he believed, manipulating his blank slate amnesia to serve her own desperate survival strategy. Phyllis justified this extreme psychological manipulation as a necessary evil to combat Victor Newman's corporate tyranny, blinding herself to the monstrous nature of her actions. Her hubris allowed her to believe she could indefinitely control a man with a historically violent and unpredictable nature, simply because his memories had been temporarily erased by a traumatic brain injury. The fragile illusion of control was violently shattered when Patty Williams, a woman driven by her own labyrinthine delusions and obsessive fixations, orchestrated Matt's escape. Patty infiltrated the hidden room, cut Matt's bindings, and spirited him away into the shadows of the city. In the immediate aftermath of his rescue, Matt was a deeply vulnerable, confused shell of a man. His mind was a terrifying void, leaving him entirely dependent on Patty's guidance and protection. Patty, seizing the opportunity to mold a companion who would never judge her own fractured past, immediately began to position herself as his sole savior and confidant, creating an intense, toxic codependency between the two fugitives. However, the human brain is a remarkably resilient and unpredictable organ, and the trauma of captivity leaves deep, indelible scars that cannot be easily suppressed. The turning point in this terrifying saga occurs when Matt is suddenly struck by violent, agonizing neurological misfire. Without warning, a blinding headache pierces through the peaceful void of his amnesia, bringing with it a rushing, overwhelming flood of fragmented images and visceral sensations. This is not a complete restoration of his identity. The dark, violent history of his past crimes against Nick and Sharon Newman remains buried in the recesses of his subconscious. Instead, the memories that violently breach the surface are entirely focused on his recent, terrifying subjugation. Matt remembers the biting friction of the ropes against his wrists, the suffocating panic of the gag, and the profound, humiliating helplessness of being treated as an object rather than a human being. Most importantly, the blurry, disjointed images solidify into a singular, crystal-clear face, Phyllis Summers. He remembers her looming over him, her voice dripping with calculated manipulation as she used his vulnerability for her own selfish gains. The sudden influx of these specific, traumatic memories sends Matt into a state of profound psychological shock. The confusion that previously defined his amnesiac state rapidly morphs into a burning, visceral anger. He realizes, with horrifying clarity, that he was nothing more than a disposable pawn in a cruel game he did not even understand. This profound sense of betrayal acts as a catalyst, igniting a dark, primal rage within Matt. He feels the stinging humiliation of being used, and that humiliation demands retribution. It is in this incredibly volatile moment that Patty Williams demonstrates her masterful, terrifying capacity for psychological manipulation. Recognizing the sudden shift in Matt's demeanor and sensing the raw, untethered fury radiating from him, Patty steps in to carefully direct his rage. She understands that to keep Matt dependent on her, she must give him a singular, external enemy to focus his newly awakened aggression upon, and Phyllis Summers is the perfect target. Patty begins to carefully and deliberately feed Matt a twisted narrative, capitalizing on his fragmented memories to paint Phyllis as a relentless, omnipresent monster. She whispers toxic lies into his ear, assuring him that his memories are entirely accurate, and that Phyllis is a deeply evil woman who took pleasure in his suffering. Patty goes a step further, manipulating his paranoia by convincing him that Phyllis is not just a figure from his recent past, but an active, lethal threat to his current survival. She weaves a terrifying tale of a woman who will stop at nothing to hunt him down, rechain him in the dark, and use him until he is entirely destroyed. Under Patty's relentless psychological grooming, Matt becomes absolutely convinced that his very existence is in jeopardy as long as Phyllis is allowed to roam free. The narrative of self-defense perfectly masks his growing desire for violent revenge. The transformation is chilling to witness. The confused, vulnerable amnesiac is entirely subsumed by focused, lethal predator. Driven by a potent cocktail of genuine traumatic memory and Patty's manufactured paranoia, Matt transitions from prey to hunter. He begins to stalk the streets of Genoa City, his movements characterized by dark, intense fixation that alarms even those who inadvertently cross his path. As Matt begins his silent, predatory hunt, Phyllis is simultaneously experiencing her own catastrophic psychological collapse. Locked away in her suite at the Grand Phoenix, she is entirely consumed by a suffocating paranoia. The realization that she failed to control Matt, coupled with the knowledge of his historically monstrous nature, has fractured her usually ironclad resilience. She paces the floor of her hotel room, jumping at every shadow and hallucinating Matt's presence in the corners of her vision. The claustrophobic atmosphere of the suite becomes a physical manifestation of her crumbling psyche. She is entirely unaware that the terrifying hallucinations haunting her waking hours are about to materialize into a very real, very deadly threat. It is profoundly heartbreaking and deeply unsettling to witness the spectacular unraveling of a powerhouse like Phyllis Summers. For years, we have watched her navigate the treacherous waters of corporate espionage and bitter family feuds with an unmatched, fiery resilience that commanded respect even from her fiercest rivals. To see her now, reduced to a trembling, paranoid shell of her former self, evokes a genuine sense of sorrow and empathy. There is a tragic, poetic irony in her current predicament. Her desperate need to outmaneuver Victor Newman led her to cross the moral event horizon, playing God with a dangerous man's life. Now, the universe is exacting a terrifying toll, proving that trauma is cyclical and that playing with dark, unpredictable forces always demands a devastating price. Watching this storyline unfold, one cannot help but feel a profound connection to her terror, recognizing that beneath the ruthless exterior of the corporate saboteur lies a deeply flawed, desperately frightened human being who simply played a dangerous game and lost everything. The tension reaches an unbearable crescendo as Matt bypasses the security of the Grand Phoenix, his predatory instincts guiding him directly to the source of his trauma. The erratic, intensely focused behavior he exhibits while navigating the hotel corridor signals a man who has entirely detached from reason, driven solely by the primal need to eliminate the source of his pain. When Matt finally breaches the sanctuary of Phyllis's suite, stepping out of the shadows and into the dim light of the room, the atmosphere instantly freezes. The terrifying reality of facing the monster she inadvertently reawakened completely paralyzes Phyllis, stripping away any remnants of her usual cunning and bravado. Matt wastes no time in launching a cold, methodical verbal assault, laying bare his fragmented memories of his captivity. He details the humiliation, the restraints, and the profound betrayal he felt, his voice vibrating with a lethal, barely contained fury. He accuses her of being a manipulative monster, echoing the toxic narrative Patty carefully planted in his mind. Phyllis, usually a master of verbal sparring and manipulation, finds herself completely disarmed. The sheer, terrifying intensity of his anger overwhelms her, and she is reduced to desperate, stammering attempts to explain her actions. Phyllis frantically tries to provide context, attempting to explain the immense pressure she was under from Victor Newman and the desperate circumstances that led to her terrible choices. She pleads for him to understand that it was a strategic move, not an act of personal malice, hoping to appeal to whatever shred of humanity might remain in his fractured mind. However, her words fall on completely deaf ears. Matt, fortified by Patty's brainwashing and his own visceral trauma, absolutely refuses to believe a single word of her explanations. To him, her desperate pleas are just more manipulation, further proof of her inherent deceitfulness. The confrontation reaches a chilling stalemate where the power dynamic is entirely inverted. The former captor is now the helpless prey, trapped in a room with a man who believes her death is the only guarantee of his own safety. Matt's refusal to listen seals Phyllis's fate, pushing her into a corner from which there appears to be no escape. The sheer, unadulterated danger radiating from Matt makes it abundantly clear that this is no longer a corporate game or a battle of wits. It is a desperate fight for physical survival against a man who has nothing left to lose and everything to avenge. As the shadows lengthen in the Grand Phoenix suite, and the reality of her imminent demise sets in, the entire city of Genoa seems to hold its collective breath. Will anyone realize the grave danger Phyllis is in before it is too late, or will her desperate, unethical choices finally exact the ultimate, fatal price? Keep watching, because this psychological thriller is only just beginning to reach its terrifying climax.